good evening, my good people. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to the Morality of the Moment. I'm Greg Corbin, and I am the director of the Restorative Justice program at Mural Arts, Philadelphia. I will be your host and your moderator for this web conversation tonight. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our speakers and the whole team at Mural Arts who have put this series together. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the initial episode in Mural Arts muraLAB series that will provide reports, discussions, and how artists are working with community organizations, public agencies in Philadelphia and beyond to address the social issues that COVID pandemic has raised. We have learned many lessons from this pandemic. We have especially learned that the fault lines that already exist in our society have been exacerbated by this emergency. And yes, that means food and shelter and healthcare, education, open space, information, community networks. All of these things have been interrupted. It's almost like an earthquake with no physical damage, but our infrastructure is obviously compromised in so many different ways. Today, we are going to focus on that fault line that is invisible to many of us, but which has deep impacts for community stability and health. Over the next hour, artists and partners of Mural Arts Philadelphia's Reimagining and Reentry Fellowship Program will discuss how the problems posed by mass incarceration have become more urgent than ever. As large numbers of people are released from incarceration into communities struggling with the crisis and the health risks that people are remaining in incarceration face. We will focus especially on how artists have mounted a public response to these issues, which can be life-threatening to incarcerated populations. For those of you who aren't familiar, Mural Arts Philadelphia is the nation's largest public art program dedicated to the belief that art ignites change. For over 35 years, Mural Arts has united artists and communities through a collaborative process rooted in the traditions of mural making to create art that transforms public spaces and individual lives. muraLAB is a program of Mural Arts Institute, which is a program of mural arts dedicated to knowledge sharing, field building, and expanding innovation. And with that, we'd like to thank the Institute of JPB Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for their support. Okay, a little bit more background about Reimagine and Reentry, and then I will ask our speakers, well, I will introduce our speakers for today. One of Mural Arts' key programs is Restorative Justice, which unites neighbors who have been affected by crime and violence through shared creative expression. The program facilitates the forging and growth of strong, positive bonds between incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals, young adults on probation, and their respective communities. With that being said, I'm going to move on to introducing our speakers. First, we have Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter. I don't know how she feels about me reading her old name, but she goes by the hip hop name of Isis the Savior. She is an activist. She is an award-winning Philadelphia-based artist who creates socially conscious music. And she is also 2018-2019 Mural Arts Philadelphia Reimagining Reentry Fellow and a 2019 Leeway Foundation Transformation Awardee. Up next, we have Nicole Fleetwood, who is a writer, curator, and professor of American Studies and Art History at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She has published several books, Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, which was recently released. I suggest you check that book out. Go support good work. And then up next is Jasmine Heist, who is based at the Vera Institute for Justice, where she is a campaign director of In Our Backyards, an initiative exploring the shifting geography of mass incarceration. Her work is meant to inform the public dialogue, engage new allies, and advance change in order to end mass incarceration, where it begins in all of our backyards. And then up last, we have James Yahya Huff, who is currently serving as the artist in residency with the District Attorney's Office of Philadelphia, which includes Larry Krasner. So I would like you to give us a virtual round of applause as we welcome and walk into this conversation. The first question I would like to ask the panel, I'm gonna start with you, Jasmine, is how is the pandemic exacerbating the issues that incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people face?
Absolutely. I mean, Greg, that is a question that we could literally spend all night answering, in part because there are ways, I think, in which it is immediately apparent, and like so much of the system, quiet and insidious ways that still aren't fully coming to light. I think the thing that we know most horrifyingly and are reminded of every day with news reports coming through is that one of the hallmarks of incarceration is a loss of physical autonomy. And so in this moment, when we're being told to socially distance, to make these decisions for ourselves and for a collective community, there are people who are trapped in a system that not only won't give them soap, won't give them hand sanitizer, but tells them you cannot make choices about your own body to keep yourself safe. As you mentioned, I think specifically about what we call the geography of incarceration. And I think one of the things that's been the most striking to me in recent days is understanding that the two biggest vectors of spread in rural communities are prisons and meatpacking plants. And I think that what that illuminates, to your question, is how this broader ethos of sort of disposability of human life that underpins all of mass incarceration is becoming so naked right now. And in Pennsylvania, where so few reprieves have been granted, where we have, an astronomical number of people who are serving life in prison, who are 65 or older, this becomes a really sort of pointed and obvious statement that people's lives simply don't matter.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you so much. I would like to pivot real quick just to Mary. I would like to get your thoughts on that. How do you think the pandemic has exacerbated these issues?
I mean, in a lot of ways, we just see that the need for reform was long overdue. And now that folks are being released in the community, there's no infrastructure in place to give them the basic needs like housing and jobs and food. So what I see is a lot of folks possibly returning back to prison or contracting the virus because they're just in a vulnerable state where they might have to take a low-level entry job that puts them on the front lines. So yeah, those are some of the ways that I'm seeing it affecting folks coming home. And also, some folks are being held in captivity indefinitely because they don't have a place to go to. So it can be used either way to deny these people access and autonomy over their lives.
And so I'll move to the next question. I'm gonna start with James on this one. How is the situation affecting you personally, and how are you responding through your artistic practice?
All right, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can, James.
Okay, cool. I mean, that's a great question, man. How I'm responding personally can be like broken up in several ways. One is, I'm very concerned with a lot of the guys I just was recently incarcerated with. I'm only 7 months released from prison. So, in many ways, it's felt like a lifetime, but in many ways, it's felt like a part of me is actually still there. So many of the guys I really care about deeply, man, as human beings are there, and I know their conditions. So that's given me some anxiety, and has made me worry about them. What I've taken to doing is I've been emailing through the institution email provider, emailing everybody I know. You know what I mean? And just trying to keep that sense of calm within myself emotionally, but at the same time spread to them that, listen, man, there's people out here that care about you guys. I care about you guys. People are worried about you guys. There's a massive effort to try to release people. So, just to try to spread that sense of, camaraderie, that people do care about you, because I think one of the most dangerous things that can happen in a situation like this, in a crisis for people incarcerated, is that they begin to believe that, one, death is imminent, and two, people outside don't care. There's this belief in prison that a large segment of the public doesn't care about them, because they are the others or the bad people. So, me as someone who's been there and is not physically present there, but emotionally and psychologically, in many ways I'm there, being able to send that message back, like, no, I care, and many other people, many other folk out in society care.
Yeah.
How has it impacted my artistic practice? in a variety of ways. In one way, you know, I've kind of had to focus on my residency, which is the primary focus of my practice now. But at the same time, work in response to COVID has not been something I've been interested in doing, you know, because I feel like, you know, whatever I can offer artistically is it pales in comparison to what's actually happening. So what I'm more interested in doing is thinking beyond COVID, thinking beyond this immediate crisis, and thinking about how I can impact people artistically and in other ways, community-based ways that, you know, will ameliorate or whatever pain they're going through or whatever trauma post-COVID will exist. Um, and if I could, just to piggyback on the first question, um, you know, one of the things about how the COVID is impacting people coming out from prison is that look at the economic situation now as far as jobs are concerned. You know, a person coming home, you know, getting a job is a requirement to be on parole, you know, and so the whole economic thing tied to your freedom, you know, with parole agents asking you to pay supervision fees and, you know, all these things could be $30 a month, which doesn't seem like much to the average person, but $30 a month to someone who has virtually nothing in assets or cash is like $1 million. So, you know, economically, you know, the crisis is like having these economic impacts on people release, man. It's just amazing. And the state had only recently decided to waive those fees for 60 days, you know, but for real, you know, in my opinion, they should be waived for the year, you know, or at least going forward, extending forward. But I'll digress on that. So,
Greg, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, you got it, Nicole.
Yeah. What are some of the responses and the emails that you're getting from your friends?
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of work to do. I've been tasked with relaying messages after messages after messages to extended family because one of the impacts of folks incarcerated is that they only get out now 40 minutes a day. So, and they have to make tough decisions between a phone call, a shower sometimes, and the ability to do other things in that short span of time. So if you figure that, you know, we can leave our homes anytime we want, you know, anytime we choose, we just have to be careful and follow CDC guidelines as well as possible. But folks incarcerated are basically trapped in their cells and get out maybe 40 minutes a day. In that 40 minutes, there's limited phone calls they can make. So I've been asked to relay multiple messages, you know, and I've been doing, you know, as much as I can within my power. So, you know, and if need be, we'll do much more. So yeah, and in specific, you know, most of the guys, their concern is about us. So, you know, as well as they're worried about themselves, you know, because they've actually witnessed some of the deaths up close. They're more concerned in a lot of ways about us, about wondering if we're okay, you know, because their perception of COVID is shaped entirely by media, you know, with, you know, or with the slight, you know, experience they have with someone actually becoming ill. But, you know, their media perception is very limited. So, you know, I've been definitely tasked with relaying messages and also tasked with, you know, sort of confirming that I'm okay.
Nice.
You know.
I appreciate that, yeah. And you know, you mentioned about your residency and the artwork, that how those things connect, but also, you know, how do you deal with in this moment we're wearing masks and we in some way have the metaphor for silence for the sake of safety. It's a very interesting connection. So I want to ask Mary the same question. You know, what aspects, not that, but how is this situation affecting you personally, and how are you responding through your artistic practice?
Well, you know, there's a couple ways that it directly impacts me, not only as a formerly incarcerated person, but as an artist and activist. Is a lot of my exhibitions and public art projects have stopped or have been postponed. One of which was a Mother's Day playborhood for women that were recently released, and also women that are in reentry. So we had to pivot and create a virtual reentry day. And just, being tasked with trying to get folks technology and make sure that they're able to get online and stay connected during quarantine. Another way that my work has been impacted, prior to the COVID-19 crisis, I was going on weekly at Riverside Corrections and conducting a creative writing workshop for the women there. And it took weeks to build, safety in the classroom and this connection where, they were able to tap into themselves and reimagine their own narratives, but from a point of resilience and empowerment, and not, being judged for the worst thing that they've ever done, and pulling power from those experiences. So those are a couple of ways that my art and practice have been impacted, as well as, being a musician and also a visual artist. Like, it's hard to get a film crew, together during this pandemic, and get the scenes that we need to get. It's safety first. So it's been real tough trying to figure out creative ways to organize. But one way we try to counter that is by doing car protests, where folks don't have to get out and, put other folks at risk. So yeah, and another thing I want to add is the virtual reentry day will be next Wednesday on the 13th. And we'll be conducting a card writing campaign, Cards for Freedom, for impacted moms, caregivers, and just general support of women that are on the inside.
Thank you for that. And so before we move forward, want to show a couple of pictures and examples of Yaya's work. Do we have that queued up? Beautiful, beautiful work.
Oh, so
Yeah.
yeah. So these are images all created while I was incarcerated. This portrait of this young man right here, who is deceased, was someone that I was incarcerated with. And I had, short story is that me and him became friends, and I painted his picture in order for him to send it to be able to be sent to his daughter. I painted it posthumously, because I believed and I know that, one, we were very close as friends, but two, his daughter needed a powerful image of her father that could communicate something deeper than a photograph. And so I believe that this portrait would do that. I think the power of portraiture in the home, and especially in the psyche of his daughter, would serve her well. So, and this image right here is also an image I drew while I was incarcerated, of the boy in the hourglass, serving a life without parole sentence. So.
Your work, it really does parallel that connection with, humanity on the inside, and the redevelopment and the rehabilitation, I guess, that's supposed to happen. And what I'm hearing is this thread between Mary and your work as it relates to healing and a search for redemption, but more so internally, like forgiving oneself and using the art to express that process. And how does that connect to policy, and how, our infrastructures are set up and designed in certain ways. And so I appreciate your feedback there. I want to make a quick pivot. This is a little bit off script, but Jasmine, what are your thoughts on any of those images? But more so, I'm thinking this might be good for you to answer as it relates to the hourglass.
Yeah, I feel like I want to pull Nicole in, since she's literally written the book on carceral aesthetics. But one of the things, and I'm curious, Nicole, if you've been thinking about this too, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about in this moment with regard to time and experiences and this question of forgiveness is, you know, right now, when we talk about people who are on the inside, who are being locked down, put in solitary confinement, who are having the world sort of filter to them through these stories about death, that's trauma. And I think many people would say, you know, and have that kind of lockdown is actually torture. That is only compounded when you say people can't access soap, people can't access hand sanitizer. And what we know about that kind of trauma for people is, you know, that takes a process of reconciliation itself. And so when I look at James's work right now and think about people who are on the inside, who are left inside, I think what will the truth and reconciliation process look like for this moment, to tell the truth about what has happened to people, to tell the truth about the way that they have been told, you know, your dignity doesn't matter, and what role will artists and what role will aesthetics play in that? Because historically, this notion of telling the truth of trauma, of torture, of harm has been the only way that nations, that individuals, that communities work through it. And I think, you know, so much of Nicole's work really speaks to how people are in community processing trauma, creating bonds, pushing back against some of that harm. And I think, you know, all of her deep relationships with people who are still on the inside will be a way to talk about what that looks like after this as well.
Yes, and thank you, Jasmine. And Nicole, definitely, please feel free. Last week you were on the call with, I believe, MoMA, and you were talking about your book, and you mentioned about the construct of time and how it's used as a form of punishment. And, you know, so please take that wherever you would like to. What are your thoughts?
Well, Jasmine, thank you for your kind words. And I'm also going to say, are we going to at some point be able to see did Mary have an excerpt from her video that she was going to be?
Yep, it's coming up next.
Oh, great. I just wanted to make sure we had time for that, because I think it's really powerful for people to engage it. And Jasmine, you're amazing with like being able to turn data into narrative. And I think one of the things I keep hearing, like, you know, we know that we're only getting a snippet of information about how COVID is impacting incarcerated people. But even when we hear, like, you know, in the last week or so that two prisons in Ohio, at least 80% of the population has tested positive. That sounds horrifying, but we actually visually have unless you've been in prison, you really don't know what that means and how horrifying that really is. Because but what it means is that people can do nothing to protect themselves. There's nothing they can do to, quote, you know, and I don't even like social distance, to physically distant. They have no control over their access to hand sanitizer, soap. Very few facilities are even thinking about giving masks. In fact, you know, a court ruled just yesterday that Miami jail doesn't have to provide masks to people. They don't have to provide hand sanitizers or anything during this crisis, right? So literally, we see, you know, region by region, some states actually not passively, but actively assigning mass death to many people.
And
right? And there's no way for us to actually visualize that. I think we're afforded the comfort by just giving numbers and not actually being able to see what that looks like when people are held in squalid, tiny quarters and have no access to like the basics of self-protection.
And Nicole, so much of my like visual of this moment and that data is often these massive gray spots on the map. So we know what percentage of people have tested positive in Ohio because they actually tested people. And in so many other states, in Arkansas, for example, we're hearing, you know, prison officials are actively choosing not to test people, to suppress it, to keep people inside. Our nation's jails, this other scaffolding of incarceration, are a black box with regard to what's happening. And so I think not only the data, but like what is the experience of being inside these places where people have been silenced, literally and figuratively.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Jasmine, for your input. That insight is powerful. I want to tie it back to a piece of work that Mary created. So we're going to cue that up right now. The video. And we are waiting patiently.
Serving my minimum was enough to make you nervous, but I rhyme it in the courtroom when they handed down the verdict. Damn. But look, yo, look, they never saw a man like this. I'm telling you. We can't be separated, even through space and time. Look, I'm here. Being broke is a pet peeve. Imagine being trapped in the hood and can't leave.
Wow. Riveting. Imagine being trapped in the hood and can't leave. So many people experience that. Mary, what aspects of your artistic work have been the most powerful and how?
Well, my art, I guess, and my life experiences are particularly always and doubly connected. That particular clip basically highlighted my experience of giving birth while shackled for 43 hours at Riverside Correctional Facility. And the film was also, not only it was healing for me to do, but also I think it gave voice to what so many women and other, you know, folks have been advocating for, is just reproductive justice. When you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate a community. And yeah, sometimes when I look at it, I still get a little choked up, but we were able to utilize that film in a very powerful way and use it as an organizing tool to raise awareness and shift policy. I, along with the Dignity Act Now Collective, as well as other women impacted at Muncie, Riverside, and women that are actively out in reentry, were able to co-author legislation last April that was introduced in Harrisburg, and we did a press conference with Joanna McClinton, Morgan Cephas. So just really humanizing that experience. And I mean, when I give talks on the work and on my experience, people are always so shocked that this is going on, and want to get involved and want to advocate and you know, just really stress the impact on families that this practice has. We need to definitely reimagine a criminal justice system that increases and encourages bonding between mothers and children, or are we just going to keep, you know, repeating these cycles of incarceration? That connection isn't maintained and supported.
Thank you. I appreciate your honesty and your courage to tell your story and to be that vulnerable with people too. It takes a lot of strength and humility to do that. So thank you so much, Mary, and to you, James. But for both of you, you both have worked as artists within the criminal justice system, as well as with organizations outside the system. Can you talk about the difference of being inside versus outside in terms of your own work?
For me, just being able to move. You know, in prison, you're not able to move. You're not able to, you know, hop on a live or Zoom. You're not able to hop on the phone when you want. You're not able to put out distress calls. You're literally at the mercy of a system that has no mercy and gives no dignity to people who have committed a crime or made a mistake. That's often rooted in some societal issue that we refuse to address. We would rather just criminalize because it's easy to shut people away and, you know, forget about them. Out of sight, out of mind. So yeah, for me, there's a huge difference in being able to be on the outside. And there's a huge responsibility, not only for myself, but for those that are struggling, that have no voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add sort of a contrast to what Mary said, while not discounting what she said, because women's institutions, as far as my knowledge is concerned, are, you know, at a total deficit when it comes to external services and programs, while while they're incarcerated, you know, and I think that also continues as they move through the system toward release. Women who are released, it sort of continues along that trajectory. Interestingly enough, I was at Graterford, and at Graterford, it was uniquely situated with its proximity to Philadelphia and its history. It had enabled a lot of prisoners, and myself included, to establish many organizations to sort of try to create a vibrant, artistic, and sort of social, community-based network of groups and programs that were aimed at reforming individuals while they were incarcerated, particularly younger folk, and also providing services and relief to people outside the prison in our communities whenever possible. I think that the inside versus outside organizing, how it has impacted me is that inside, there's the politics of prison, and that's difficult to navigate a lot of times. You know, you have intra-group politics, you have racial politics, you have community politics, neighborhood politics, so, and on and on and on. In the streets, you have the same things, but I think in the streets, everything's sort of controlled by capital. And I think that, you know, that's what's been more difficult for me to navigate, is that when you're in society, it boils down to a dollar, and, you know, the politics sort of begin and end there. You know what I mean? I hate to say it, but I think most of the last few altruistic people may be incarcerated.
Wow.
Because, you know, because we had brothers that would literally volunteer all their time. You know what I mean? You know, as much as they could, and work for free for years. You know what I mean? In order to mentor, to provide their skills and abilities, talents, and services, to run programs or organizations for the benefit of others. You know what I mean? You know,
Wow.
with nothing, with virtually nothing in it for themselves. You know what I mean? You know, not even a paper certificate. So they were that committed. You know, and I wish we had a little bit more of that out here. You know, not to say that I've met some beautiful and super committed people out here. So not to say that, but I know that, you know, inside it's sort of the politics sort of that runs everything versus the money out here, you know, versus funding and money issues that come with organizing and activism out in society.
Deep.
So,
and you don't hear that storyline a lot, right? The support systems, the mentorship. And I know you have a strong relationship with people that have, you know, been released that do art as well.
yeah.
You know, it's a very valuable thing to continue to build up our society, but also the communities that are going back in to society. So I want to, Jasmine, you look like you wanted to say something. Am I?
I'm thinking so much again of Nicole's book and of the conversations we had previously about the way in which right now, you know, mutual aid societies sort of mimic these much deeper relationships that are forged on the inside as a tool of survival. I mean, I'm sort of smiling. I want Nicole to talk more about that. I'm sort of smiling at this notion that's very real, that everything is controlled by capital on the outside. And I wanted to sort of connect that back to something you said about infrastructure at the beginning, Greg. Like, this is a moment in which the deficit in infrastructure is being so powerfully illuminated. And infrastructure is a moral question, and it always has been. And I think holding up the fact that, you know, Graterford is closed because the most expensive project in Pennsylvania state history was the prison that replaced it. Yeah. How might the money that was spent on that facility have been used to prepare for this moment so that infrastructure did not become a question of life and death?
Good point. You got, yeah, Nicole, you got it, Nicole. I was actually going to.
And Jasmine's very kind about keeping everyone in a conversation. And so thank you very much. And I was thinking about Mary. So I think we're all thinking about each other. And also something that James said earlier, I know that Mary's very modest, but she's been doing lots of work trying to bring people out of jails and prisons right now. And what I find inspiring, I mean, we're in a just a horrifying moment globally. We know that, right? But I am inspired by people who are directly impacted, using whatever resources and tools they have available to be in conversation, right? Like James said, it can be life or death to get a message to somebody, right? I mean, you can change the whole trajectory of someone's life, the way they connect with their a loved one, their attorney, whoever it is, right? That is so important. And also Mary, as someone knows what it means to be in prison, especially at this critical moment, has put herself in situations that, could be, that could expose her, to help bring people out. And I think that is, in terms of thinking about like the morality of the moment, which is what the theme of this was, right? Is then like, what are the direct actions that we can take, even as we quarantine, right? If there's anything that I learned from like all the years of researching my book, is how people like James and Mary and people who are still in prison use whatever resources they have available to practice belonging, right? What you do not do is let the state sever your ties with people you love, with communities you care about, and with ways of like being able to perform agency. I think one of the things, as we know, that incarcerated people don't have control over mobility, over their space, over time as punishment. It's also important to not just discuss like millions of people as like having no agency or not having any ability to have, like, so I think we also have to think about like really kind of, even in a moment of crisis, what does it mean to have like an asset rich conversation about people who are susceptible to like death at a much greater rate than we are, right? So kind of shifting those conversations too.
Right, and Nicole, how do you think artists are making these issues, making people aware of these issues? How is this pushing forward the advocacy for these issues? You brought up Mary and the work that she's doing some astounding work, so how do you think artists are really, putting their work out there to push this forward?
I think a lot of things happen. And one, I think that many artists are paralyzed, that their lives are made vulnerable. Like Mary was saying, many of her events are postponed, right? So everyone's having to kind of reshift and improvise in different kinds of ways. But I've seen across the kind of prison spectrum, people trying to, like Jasmine said, create mutual aid societies, figure out how do we do resource pooling, how do we create kind of alliances so that we're supporting each other's messages. And also, but I think that this is not just about art for art's sake, but this is really about, life or death matters for people, like absolutely very critical, not abstract issues. And this is my fear about like the focus on data. I think data is very important. I'm not dismissing data, but if data without narrative, without like actual, like what that means for millions of people who are living conditions of captivity, I think it's easy for us to just like walk away from it. Like we don't feel the kind of urgency of like, no, actually, whether someone is quote guilty of something or not, I'm not stuck on like guilt or like if someone's guilty, but that we're actually saying that we're creating institutions, we're supporting institutions of death, that they're death machines, literally.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much. And just so we stay on track, we got to move to the Q&A. But that's the first place we have to go. And right now, the only question I'm really seeing is, how does this pandemic affect you family-wise? And that's actually asked by one of the guild members. How does this affect you family-wise? And I want to go to Mary first, because her work really does center around family and the impact on mothers and just women in general as it relates to the structure of family. So Mary, you got it.
For me, the impact on my personal family has been, it's been a little tough because, my son, he's home all day now. And, there has to be a balance between, me doing the activism work, me working on my own art and practice, and then also doing, homeschooling essentially, and finding, things for him to find meaning in and feel good about, because I feel like our mental health is definitely on the line, and we'll probably see a lot of mental health related issues moving forward. But I also, before this is over, want to shout out National Bailout.org, who's raised over $2 million since 2017. And this is all mutual aid. This is all individual donations, over 17,000 from folks in the community. And it really comes out of the practice of slavery when we had to buy each other's freedom. Yeah. So utilizing that same mantra, you know, money kept them in, but love got them out. Black love got them out. So I'm working on the ground with them, organizing bailouts here in Philly and in Pittsburgh. So this virtual Reentry Day will be a statewide effort. Also, I want to shout out again the Dignity Act Now Collective, Philly Bell Fund, People Paper Co-op, and all the people that's like on the ground really putting in work to make sure that women and caregivers get what they need, especially with Mother's Day on Sunday. We're trying to bring home as many caregivers as possible so they can be with their children during this crisis.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much. And for the people that are watching this right now, the audience, please send us your questions as much as you can while we have the time. Next question is, James, what have you learned from working inside the DA's office about how to move public perception of these issues?
Oh, man. So full transparency, you know, like my stint or my ability to interact with that office was curtailed in a lot of ways by COVID. However, what I was beginning to see with the few interactions that I did have was that Philadelphia, man, is in a great space with the prosecutor and the office that's been elected and assembled under the leadership of D.A. Krasner. I mean, they are in the community 24/7. You know what I mean? I think the biggest challenge people have is that you can't have a city that suffered under various regimes of, you know, hostile police, hostile officers, and, you know, just a horrific law enforcement, and then you get 1 to 2 to 3 years of this and think that things will change automatically. I think people sort of need to understand that, you know, what they're doing out of their office, man, is really dynamic and really amazing in comparison to, you know, previous administrations and previous individuals who, you know, who had literally built their careers on destroying communities in Philadelphia. And if we just look at the last district attorney who's currently in federal prison, I mean, you know, that just speaks to, you know, the levels of corruption that the city has suffered under for decades. You know what I mean? So, you know, what I see happening in that office that I wish more people would see is that Philadelphia, in comparison to many cities around the country, has probably the most progressive district attorney who is really a champion for the citizens of Philadelphia. You know, and he's assembled an office that executes that will, you know, that executes that community-based mandate that he was put in office with. So that's what I wish more people could see, you know.
Thanks so much for that. Thank you so much for that, James. And the next question is from Thomas Hinton. What type of bills have been proposed to help release the prison population? And I'll go with Jasmine on this one.
Yeah, so I can take that. You know, one of the things that's been interesting specifically in Pennsylvania is that there was an initial sort of recognition that in comparison to many other states, the governor's autonomy to release people was somewhat limited, although certainly not as limited as you'd believe by the numbers of people who have been released. And so there was initially conversation about expanding the capacity to either temporarily release people in the context of the pandemic or to expand the potential for things like parole or compassionate release. What I will say, you know, is that Governor Wolf currently ostensibly has the power to grant reprieves to people who are in prison. But the way in which they have sort of prescribed who is eligible for those reprieves, I would say, again, to go back to your initial question, sort of reveals in this moment how so many people think about who is deserving of life and a chance at survival. So they've been targeted toward people who, for example, are within 9 months of release if they have underlying conditions, or 12 months of release if they do not. We, again, in Pennsylvania, have one of the highest, if not the highest, rate of people serving life in prison, or, de facto life, because people have been sentenced to 100 years or to what is effectively a life sentence. There are about 700 people, again, over the age of 65 who are serving life. And I think the question is, why in this moment in Pennsylvania and across the country have so many people been so unwilling to say, this is a moment to bring people home, who do not pose a risk to public safety, who have spent decades on the inside, and not say, as Nicole said, right, we're going to leave you in a death machine. On the front end, the work that Mary is doing to bail people out, the question that underlies that for me is, why do we still connect money to people's freedom in this country? Yeah. Why are people not simply being released in this moment? And so, I think what we're seeing is some states begin to look at reducing the use of cash bail, begin to look at more compassionate release policies, but not nearly enough.
Yeah. And I'm gonna go to Zane's. Well, thank you, Jasmine. Thank you for that answer. I'm gonna go to Zane's question. He said, I feel like situations like this that present us with a crisis also present us with opportunities. Do you see any opportunities to create major change and build anew as we emerge from this pandemic? I'll go to Nicole first on this one.
Again, thank you for this conversation. That's a great question. And I'm also thinking about, like, a friend and colleague I'm going to be in conversation with very soon about Ruha Benjamin, who's a professor at Princeton. And she quotes a novelist, I can't think of, Arundhati Roy, thank you, about that, about the crisis being a portal, right? And I think it's so important not to turn that into beautiful speech, right? Because a portal sounds like, this kind of opening, but right, it's only a portal if we make it a portal, right? If we're gonna do the really critical and hard work of transformation. And right now, what we have is, I think it's just completely blatant, the fact that our federal government is saying, let's put more people on the front line so they'll die so that we can go back to, like, extractive, necropolitical capitalism, right? So who's using the portal for what, right? Like, because the portal could also lead us to, like, just more levels of surveillance, more, it can actually reproduce the kind of carceral logic where we're actually, right now I feel like it's just enforcing a type of self-governing and type of self-surveillance that for me is very, very scary, right? And it's and that's a type of docility, a type of kind of, obedience to the law. So, who's using the portal for what, right? And how might we think of other kind of alliances and communication happening that's not on Facebook, that's like off the grid, right? That is leading us to another kind of conversation, another type of way of being together, whether we're together in physical proximity or not, right? That another sense of kind of togetherness and belonging. And that's why I was really curious about the messages that James was getting from people inside, right? The kind of messages, so right, because those are messages that to me can be leading us somewhere else also.
Yeah, and Nicole, thank you so much for what you contributed to the movement too. Your book, Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Like, we don't have the time, but I really would love to, maybe we can close out with, maybe that's one of the answers from you, just like what inspired you to even write that book. But just like think about that right now while we pivot a little bit. I want to ask James, what do you see coming out of this? What opportunities? You're working with the district attorney. You're doing work in the community. You're actually involved with people who may be even coming home. What are some of the challenges that you see that could be opportunity from people who are reentering society when they're talking about rapid release, but they're not really talking about rapid job development, rapid security, rapid shelter, right? So, what is the opportunity you see?
Yeah, I think in essence, the word crisis, has it in its root, is pregnant with opportunity, right? So inside of crisis, you know, there presents itself an opportunity to do things, a turning point, a fork in the road, you know, so they say. I think that, you know, when we think about what this crisis means in the lives of people incarcerated, in one sense, I believe that any wise person in corrections, any wise person that's in state government realizes that they're going to have to take off the mass part of the incarceration unless they want to just you know, have worse outcomes in the next pandemic or the next outbreak. So that mass part is going to have to fade in some respects. And Jasmine's right. You know, one of the most shocking things that people would find when if they were to go inside a prison is that the bulk of the lifer population, you know, some of the most quote unquote violent individuals that can't be released, quote unquote, are a bunch of old men, you know, on canes and in wheelchairs, you know what I mean? So and who couldn't, if they had a violent inclination, couldn't enact it, you know. So in that sense, I mean, it's shocking how you know, it's almost like paper a Wild West town, you know, where it looks real, but in essence, it's a phony town. And in essence, you know, there's this boogeyman in prison, but he's an old 72-year-old guy in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? You know, so I think that common sense could prevail in realizing that some of these guys and girls and ladies, excuse me, need to be paroled into society and given different outcomes, different release outcomes. On the other side of that, I think that this could possibly spur the building of smaller facilities to house individuals, to contain them. You know, so we could be looking at prison expansion on a smaller scale, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, there's a bunch of possibilities. I mean, unfortunately, you know, and I hate to put it this way, but our opponents in this struggle are some of the most devious and wickedly wise people, you know, in the business that they're in. And they are literally at the drawing table right now as we speak, coming up with scenarios and plans. I mean, you know, so in how they will pivot and maneuver post this crisis. So, you know, it wouldn't shock me that they have dozens of, you know, at the next. And I know Jasmine, and I'll close, but I know Jasmine is shaking her head because at the next, I guarantee you, at the next corrections expo and seminar, there'll be dozens of COVID-based products, you know, sanitized, particularly aimed at the correctional state correctional budgets to trim off more money from the taxpayer. So.
And the thing, I mean, that we're already seeing, that I already see, James, so much what I focus on is jail construction and this question of infrastructure. What is moral infrastructure? That in some places they're saying we do not have the money to build facilities. We have to sort of reorient to what is real public safety. And in some places you see very skillful sheriffs saying, if I had a bigger facility, if I had a nicer jail, then I could keep everyone inside and keep them safe, which is a fallacy, but it is this sort of, you know, carceral humanist argument about the fact that we can just make better forms of punishment and correction. And, you know, your experience inside that video that Mary showed us really like ripped that mask off, as you said. There are not kind and gentle facilities that would save people from a virus.
Not at all. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we have one more question from Khalif Hooker. He says, for Mary, do you think your situation would have went worse with the pandemic going on if you were still incarcerated?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't even imagine the horror.
Right.
It's funny because before the pandemic, I couldn't imagine a more horrible series of events. But when we throw in COVID-19, I mean, I probably wouldn't even be given a ventilator if I needed one, and what that would have meant for, you know, the life of my child. So yeah, that's scary to think about. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it would have been even more strained connection between me and my family, as far as like, we know folks on the inside are not getting to use the phone regularly, and having to choose, as James said earlier, you know, with the shower or the phone call. Not being able to get visitation, especially, you know, with having a newborn. Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like for a mom right now to be experiencing, you know, giving birth and just not being able to connect with their child at all.
And Mary, you just brought up something that, like, we're not talking about much. I mean, I think people who are doing the research know, but like across the country, incarcerated people are not able, their visitations have been canceled, right? So it's like even further isolation while you're in these closed quarters. Like, how can you be, you know, it's the feeling of isolation, even though you're in an overcrowded, dirty death box.
Yeah.
Right.
Which brings up this, like, the pandemic is a portal to what, and who will take ownership of that? Because we already saw, even with women, the fastest growing correctional population, families being left behind, increasingly jail and prison systems moving entirely to jail and video visitation. And to be able to then justify that in the name of safety in this moment is so dangerous on the other side of this.
We already know a pregnant incarcerated woman died in a federal facility a few days ago, right? It's not hypothetical, it's actually happening.
It's a fact, it's practice now. Unfortunately, it's a horrible practice, right?
And the tragedy, you know, like added into that tragedy is if we don't memorialize them, those who pass in this crisis, their deaths will literally, with the exception of them being remembered by their families and friends, their deaths to the nation won't be memorialized properly. You know, they won't be laid to rest properly. Because I know at some point, as a nation, we will mourn collectively for all those who have passed due to this pandemic. But incarcerated people will reside in a segregated graveyard in that sense, you know, and that's really, and that'll be shameful.
And
you know, that'll really be shameful.
On brand, you know, with the carceral system and who deserves dignity, recognition, and to be humanized. So.
And Mary, your work, it really, really highlights that. You know, you said you couldn't imagine what you might be going through right now if you were incarcerated, but your work as an artist actually allows us to imagine and reestablish what we can see with our own eyes, and takes us even out of our, what seems to be our free space, into a space that could be as well incarcerated. So, you know, and the same thing with you too, James, you know, y'all both do this with your art and provide ways and pathways to justice. And the same thing goes for, you know, Jasmine and Nicole with their work around policy, around advocacy, around building and constructing in a case that says, listen, there is real fact, there is science here, there is evidence that something is really wrong with our ethics and our own morality. And so to close this out, I want you all I'm gonna give you about 20 seconds, 30 seconds at the most, because we're over time. Please say whatever you need to say so we can wrap this up in a decent, nice knot. So I'll start with James.
Oh, okay. Just briefly, you know, as I just spoke on, you know, let's keep in mind that this crisis will end, and we need to be forward thinking in what we will do post this COVID, right? Also, just one more thing, man, you know, those who do die in prison, you know, let's not forget them. You know, let's remember them. They leave behind family members and children, loved ones, and let's remember them. Sad story. We had a brother, Rudolph Sutton, man, who died, who was, you know, who was innocent and was unable to be released because of the review of his case was slow. And he ended up succumbing and dying to this illness inside prison, in Phoenix prison, in SCI Phoenix in Pennsylvania. Tragic, but just one story of many. So let's not forget them. Let's keep them in mind, man, and let's properly mourn and memorialize and try to save lives in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And Jasmine, you got it.
So I'm going to fold this into an answer to a question I saw come up and disappear, which was about what's happening for people with substance use problems. And I think what that speaks to is actually a deeper thing that I want to end with, which is we've taken for granted that incarceration should be the place where people with mental illness, substance use, poverty, that is the place that those responses happen. And I think right now where you have judges saying, I don't want to release someone because I'm afraid they'll overdose and die, you have to ask the question, why were they there in the first place? Why was prison or jail the response to that? And so coming out of this, I think the morality of the moment question is, how do we dismantle and rebuild things outside of carceral infrastructure that actually respond to these questions and challenges, and not take for granted that that is the only or best place for most people, or really any people.
Thank you, Jasmine. Nicole, the author of Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, please.
Well, I don't have a takeaway. What I want to say is that I've learned so much from everyone here. Like, it's, for me, it's like keeping the conversation. Who are you in community with, right? And how do you continue to grow that community? Tomorrow, James and his good friend Russell and I are going to be having a conversation also on Facebook Live through Revolution Books at 7 p.m. Yes. And it's really about like their art making and the friendship that they cultivated while they were at Greaterford together. Absolutely. So I want to plug that. It's open to the public again, 7 p.m. tomorrow, Revolution Books Facebook page live.
Awesome. Thank you. Mary, you got the last word.
If you want to support helping to bail out Black mamas for Mother's Day, go over to NBO, National Bailout Org, make a donation. If you're interested in offering some, help with supportive services to help keep these folks free during quarantine and connected with folks, donate to the Dignity Act Now Collective. You can go on their website and reach that GoFundMe. And next Wednesday, May 13th at 2 p.m., we will have a statewide virtual reentry day to support those who we recently bailed out and folks that are actively in reentry.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the audience. And I want to thank, we have a lot of people from our guild for Restorative Justice actually paying attention to this as well. I see the names. It's really awesome and encouraging. So of course, we're at our hour now, and these issues that our speakers and hopefully folks in the audience will continue to focus on. I'd like to thank our speakers for taking part in our conversation tonight. Again, the audience for being there to support this. You can get more information about the topics discussed today by visiting the muraLAB page at muralarts.org. Of course, muralarts.org, muralarts.org, where you will find links to restorative justice resources, video and audio archives of our talk today, and a blog report. That's the muraLAB page at muralarts.org. I'd also like to remind you all that there are 4 more conversations that will follow every Wednesday at 5:15 for the next 4 weeks. We'll be looking at rapid response projects artists are doing throughout the city, personal wellness, building community, and how the pandemic is changing the work of public artists. We hope you'll join us for these fascinating conversations. Thanks again. Keep in touch and be well. We will see you back here next Wednesday at 5:15 for another muraLAB. Be well, stay safe.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Welcome. Thank you so much, everyone.
And thanks to all. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good work, Greg.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate it. Good job, Mary. They said we're still live. Thank you, everyone at Mural Arts as well. Thank you so much. This doesn't get done without the whole Mural Arts family. Peace.